The mess hall of Outpost Kepler 442 buzzed with the usual evening chatter, a cacophony of clicks, whistles, and guttural sounds from a dozen different species. Commander Zethkar of the Hegemony's Third Fleet stabbed at his nutrient paste with obvious disgust, his four eyes scanning the room until they settled on the lone human sitting in the corner. "Look at it," Zethkar chittered to his companions, his mandibles clicking in amusement. The mythical human warrior. Sergeant Marcus Chen didn't look up from his meal, though his weathered hands paused momentarily over his tray. At 53, he was old by military standards, his graying hair and scarred face telling stories most beings in the room couldn't imagine. Lieutenant Vexthal, a towering insectoid with razor-sharp claws, joined the conversation. "I've heard their legends. They claim their ancestors fought with primitive weapons, sticks and stones, and somehow conquered their entire planet." "Preposterous," snorted Captain Morden, his crystalline hide shimmering with derision. "My species mastered plasma weaponry before we could even walk upright. How could such primitive creatures ever threaten anyone?" The laughter that followed was harsh and grating, drawing attention from across the mess hall. Several other alien officers began gathering around Zethkar's table, eager to join in the mockery. "Tell us, human," Zethkar called out, his voice carrying across the room. "Is it true that your people once believed they could defeat enemies with sharp metal on sticks?" Marcus finally looked up, his dark eyes meeting the commander's gaze. He said nothing, but something in his expression made a few of the aliens shift uncomfortably. "Come now, don't be shy," pressed Lieutenant Vexthal. "We've all heard the ridiculous stories. Humans charging into battle with nothing but bladed weapons, screaming like mad beasts. Surely even you can see how absurd that sounds to civilized species." A reptilian officer named Seska hissed in amusement. "I particularly enjoy the tale about humans fighting with their bare hands. As if flesh and bone could ever stand against proper technology." Marcus slowly stood, his chair scraping against the metal floor. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the suddenly quiet mess hall. He was not an imposing figure by alien standards, barely average height, lean rather than muscular, but something about his movements commanded attention. "You want to know about human myths?" Marcus asked quietly, his voice carrying despite its softness. "Let me tell you about Thermopylae." He began walking toward their table, his steps measured and deliberate. 300 Spartans held off an army of hundreds of thousands for 3 days. They knew they were going to die. They chose to stay anyway. Zethkar scoffed. "Impossible." "No rational being would, or maybe you'd prefer something more recent," Marcus continued, ignoring the interruption. Normandy Beach. Thousands of humans charged machine gun nests across open sand, knowing most wouldn't make it. They did it anyway. The alien officers exchanged glances, some of their amusement fading. "Iwo Jima," Marcus said, now standing just a few feet from their table. "Stalingrad. The chosen reservoir. Every single time when faced with impossible odds, humans did the one thing your civilized species never could." "Which is what, exactly?" Morden asked, his crystalline hide flickering with nervous energy. Marcus smiled, but there was nothing warm about it. "They refused to quit." Suddenly the lights went out. Emergency illumination flickered on moments later, bathing everything in a hellish red glow. Alarms began blaring throughout the station, and the intercom crackled to life. "All personnel to battle stations. Enemy boarding parties detected in sectors 7 through 12. This is not a drill." Chaos erupted in the mess hall as officers scrambled for their weapons and positions. Through the transparent aluminum windows, the twisted shapes of devour ships could be seen latching onto the station's hull like parasites. The Devourers, silicon-based entities that consumed organic matter for fuel, had found them. Within minutes, the sound of weapons fire echoed through the corridors. The aliens moved efficiently to their posts, following protocol exactly as trained. But when the first wave of Devourers broke through Sector 9, their disciplined formations began to crumble. The creatures were nightmarish, 8-foot-tall masses of living crystal with countless razor-sharp appendages. They moved with inhuman speed, their forms shifting and adapting to whatever weapons were used against them. Zethkar's unit took position in Corridor Junction Alpha 7, their plasma rifles charging with high-pitched whines. When the first Devourer rounded the corner, they opened fire in perfect synchronization. The creature absorbed the energy blasts, growing larger and more aggressive. It reached the first alien soldier before he could fire a second shot. "Fall back," Zethkar screamed, his earlier bravado evaporating as his troops scattered. They retreated through the station, their disciplined withdrawal quickly becoming a panicked rout. The Devourers pressed their advantage, cutting through the alien forces like a scythe through wheat. As Zethkar rounded a corner, gasping for breath, he nearly collided with Marcus. The human stood calmly in the corridor, checking the action on what appeared to be an ancient slug-thrower rifle. "What are you doing?" Zethkar demanded. "We need to reach the escape pods." Marcus looked at him with those same steady eyes. "No, we need to buy time for the evacuation." Before Zethkar could respond, Marcus turned and walked directly toward the sound of approaching Devourers. The alien commander watched in horrified fascination as the human took position at the far end of the corridor, raised his primitive weapon, and waited. The first Devourer came around the corner like liquid death, moving faster than anything that size had a right to move. Marcus didn't flinch. He simply aimed and fired. The slug punched through the creature's crystalline hide, causing it to stumble but not fall. A second shot followed immediately, then a third. Each impact sent fractures spreading through the Devourer's form. More creatures poured into the corridor, but Marcus held his ground. He fired with mechanical precision, each shot placed exactly where it would do the most damage. When his rifle ran empty, he drew a sidearm. When that ran dry, he pulled out what looked like a primitive knife. The first Devourer to reach him learned why humans had once ruled their world with sharpened metal. Marcus moved like violence itself, the blade finding every weak point in the creature's crystalline structure. He ducked under slashing appendages, rolled away from crushing blows, and struck back with calculated fury. When the second creature attacked, he was ready for it. When the third joined the fight, he adapted. When a fourth tried to flank him, he somehow managed to position himself so that the creatures interfered with each other's attacks. Zethkar watched from his hiding spot as this single human held off an entire pack of Devourers, with nothing but primitive weapons and absolute refusal to yield ground. It was impossible. It was irrational. It was thoroughly, undeniably human. By the time reinforcements arrived to retake the sector, Marcus stood alone among the crystal fragments of 6 dead Devourers. He was bleeding from a dozen wounds, his uniform torn and burned, but he was still standing. Later, as medics tended to his injuries, Zethkar approached the human warrior. "I don't understand," the alien officer admitted. "Why didn't you retreat? Why didn't you run when any rational being would have fled?" Marcus looked up from the medic's ministrations, and Zethkar saw something in those human eyes that he had never seen in any other species, something that had taken humanity from primitive hunters to galactic citizens in just a few centuries. "Because," Marcus said simply, "someone had to hold the line." Zethkar finally understood. Human myths weren't stories about what they had done. They were promises about what they would always do, no matter the cost. The mythical human warrior wasn't a legend. He was a warning,